So today I have Susie Mills with me from Oxygen. I'm really excited to have her on our talk series for marketing as a force for good Substack community. And today we're going to be talking about sustainable web and this great report that you have just come out, I think within the last month, like weeks ago.
Yeah, weeks ago, yeah.
Really soon.
I'm a little jaded after 2 days of Blue Earth Summit and talking and all the rest of it. I'm sure you are. But yeah, no, good. Really glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're like kind of coming down from like the Blue Earth hype and everything, going like around and like seeing everybody. And now it's kind of like, oh, time to sleep.
Yeah, well, and then we obviously had our Clean Creatives event last night as well, which you were co-hosting. So it has felt like really a whirlwind. Great. It was really great. It was really, there's lots of new faces, which is always good.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I was really impressed with the turnout.
Yeah,
I was happy with how many people, and so many people were happy and engaged and excited to be there. And it was just a really lovely environment.
It was, yeah. It does feel like a really sort of good community to be a part of that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, last time we were speaking was actually at Change Now.
Yes.
And I think that was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that have been happening amongst those 6 months behind the scene at Oxygen and everything that you're doing with the sustainable web. And what were we doing? I remember we also had a Clean Creatives Mixer event.
We did.
And you were in casual conversation with me and you were like, Megan, I have this really cool idea. And I'm seeing this problem amongst all my clients and they don't know what it means to have a sustainable website and the carbon footprint behind all of that and everything. And you were just so excited about it. There was so much energy there. It was wonderful. And now we're sitting down and we're talking about that process, the end product of that initial excitement. Yeah. So kind of talk me through a little bit of that passion. Like, where is that coming from? Why were you so excited at that moment to bring sustainable web and this topic, to the mainstream?
Yeah, well, I guess I probably need to take a sort of slight step back and sort of just, sort of talk about how Oxygen came into sort of creation, and then from there how that's led to this kind of journey, because it has been a bit of a journey. So we were initially we set up Oxygen as a sideline to an organisation we were already working at. So there's 5 in my team, and during the pandemic, in fact. Because what else do you do in a pandemic but set up an agency? And so to begin with, it was just it was always ever only working with mission-driven organisations, but more focusing on the kind of accessible graphic design and still doing websites, but not having such a focus on it. And websites always built in an ethical way, so they were light and sort of eco-friendly. And then gradually over the next sort of 3 or 4 years, it took up sort of initially 10% of our time and then 20% of our time whilst doing our kind of day jobs. And then last year, my then CEO came to me and said, look, I really think you've got something here that you could have as a whole entity. So after a bit of soul searching and ensuring that my team were 100% on board, because I was never doing it without all of them being on board with it and coming with me, we became independent as of last September and started trading this January as Oxygen Communications Limited. And like I said, always really only ever working with mission-driven organisations. I was previously big agency side for the whole of my career before I started working with Oxygen, or setting up Oxygen, and used to work for very not mission-driven clients. And just really by the end of it, and I think it's when I had kids as well, it just sort of changes your mindset about, wanting to just do something that was a bit better for the world, for people and for planet, not sell another car or, with your marketing skills. So, and I think all of us at Oxygen have a real passion for design for good, marketing for good, anything that is actually that makes you want to get up and out of bed in the morning, is something that I can say to my kids that, that they're sort of, I'm proud of what I do. I'm proud of what Oxygen does. So that was the kind of basis of why we started it and, who we were working with. And then the more we sort of spoke about website design in a sort of this eco-friendly way with our clients, but also just general sort of, as we were talking to organisations generally and networking. And it just came up again and again and again that I'd say, do you know if your website is sustainable? And they'd go, sorry, what? What do you mean? What's an eco-friendly website? And, and we were just talking even just before this, we started recording about being at Blue Earth Summit. And yesterday and the day before, there's, I think, one conversation I've had out of everyone, all the conversations I've had, and no, they all still were saying, sorry, what? And these are people who are working in sustainability, who are here because they believe in doing good things for people and planet. And it's not, it's not sort of turning a blind eye to it, I don't think. It's a genuine lack of awareness about the fact that there's a digital footprint to to everything we do online, and including everyone's websites.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, that's fascinating. And I would also plug in there because I think a lot of people don't realize like how much influence they can actually have over it. Like you say you're like a marketer or a creative inside a department, and you're working at a SaaS company and it's an internet company, for example, and you think, well, I'm not printing so much paper, or I'm not doing these other things that you would think is like traditional waste reduction or acts within your marketing department. And I think your website is like one of the most important pieces of your digital assets that you can optimize and reduce.
Yeah, there is. And it's a real tangible thing, which we'll get onto later, about, little steps you can take. And I think when we launched this report last month at an event, the main thing I wanted to say is that we did not do this to beat people over the head with what they're doing wrong. It is really, really not that, because that's not productive or helpful. What it is intended to do is to highlight that gap, specifically where mission-driven organisations who are doing such good things, and especially if you work in the environmental space, and then why is there this gap? So the report really looks into sort of the reasons behind why people might not be aware, or and just to sort of try and bridge that gap, and then give sort of recommendations and tips on how to improve. And I think, well, there is definitely a perception that to have an eco-friendly website, that you'd have to spend thousands to redo it, and if you did want to rebuild it, green coded up from the bottom, that would obviously cost money. And if you're redoing your website anyway, then you should definitely consider doing it in that way. But there are loads of things that you can do internally. You don't have to have a developer to do it. To really help optimize your website.
Yeah. So let's take a step back a little really quick, because I definitely want to get to the report. There's a lot of good things to digest there.
Yeah.
But I actually want to dive into the statistics that you start the report with about the digital sector, because I think it's going to kind of help set the landscape of what we're really dealing with here at the moment. So in the report, you say that right now the digital sector is estimated at 3 to 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to other industries like the airline industry, which is only 2.5, you start to see just how rapid digital technology is growing and at pace. And you throw AI in there and all these other things, and it compounds. But what's really striking to me is in the report you said that you expected the data that you pulled to these emissions to increase by 60% by 2040, which is just wow.
Yeah.
And 6.7% total GHG emissions is expected from that kind of sector. So when you were pulling that data, how did that make you feel, and kind of what was that thought process?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just, it was a bit shocking to start with. And I think it's funny because, everyone knows about the impact of air travel, like you mentioned, and yet the digital sector is way bigger a contributor, and it's just not spoken about. It's not known. And even there's a quote in the report, which I love, was one of our contributors, is that, if even the word, the cloud, it makes you think of light and airy and fluffy. And, the reality is it's very much not that. And I guess that projection is obviously based quite a lot around, AI and the increase of data centers and the water that's needed to cool them down, the energy they take to use in the first place, but the water that's needed to cool them. So, it's not a problem that's going away anytime soon, which is part of the reason of kind of really investing the time to do this report, because, we are very, our values are very much not just about the work that we do, but also trying to be thought leaders in this space and trying to help people and planet. We know that we can't save the world on their own. No one can. But if we can take any small steps to help towards that and to help decrease that, that drastic rise over the next few years, then, I think it's our responsibility to do so.
And I really like that, because it really also brings everybody into the process of doing good in some way. It's, the small actions of everyday marketers and creators and people who are running a website or even have those digital assets to do something. So I really like that message. And Wow, it just like blows me like that 6%. Like that's huge because again, we always talk about the airline industry and like people and like, saying, oh, you shouldn't fly so much. This like 3% is way different than 6%. There's a big, big difference.
Well, I guess everyone, people can choose and hopefully will choose not to fly as much, but everyone uses the internet. Like everyone.
Every day.
So every day.
And it's growing.
All the time. And it's growing.
And all around the world too. Like I think we forget about that, the global south and these places are starting to adopt more and more of this technology and be more engaged, which is a good thing. But also we have this problem to solve. Where exactly, so if we look at this digital journey of, what we're talking about, everything from apps to data centers to, this area, can you kind of describe the resources that are associated with that? I think that'll help people understand like the impact that we're talking about. 6%, that's a lot, but there's a lot of things happening. There's water usage back there. There's data centers, there's energy consumption, there's dirty energy consumption. Can you kind of explain, all those impactful negative impacts behind the digital assets and the digital technology world?
Yeah. Well, I think you've sort of touched on the main ones there, really, which is, the sort of, like I mentioned earlier, anything you do online has a footprint, and it is drawing energy, using energy, which then, if you're using data centers, which are then sort of increasing by I don't even know what the stat is about how quickly they're growing, and the amount of water that's used to cool those down. And I think there's a lot of talk about kind of, using AI, which as an individual person, that isn't going to, it doesn't use up that much, that individual person. But what we're looking at is just the mass of people that are using these massive different ways, sort of, that's using up energy and water. So it's so funny because also at the Blue Summit, I think the theme that I've really noticed here has been around, this feeling of we're all in this together, and this sort of feel of, like I mentioned earlier, but no one person, no one organisation can solve this problem themselves.
Well, let's get into the report because I think there's a lot of more insights that we can definitely dig in there.
Yeah,
I can feel you pulling towards like it's such a good thing. There's so many good things to say there. So let's start with the executive summary.
Yeah,
it was a really great piece, very well written. The copywriter over here was like, "Yes, this is great copy." And the executive summary says, many purpose-driven organizations remain unaware that their websites may conflict with their sustainability goals, unquote. So can you share a specific moment when you kind of realize this, from the Blue Earth Summit or, from your day-to-day? You've already shared a little bit on it, but maybe a specific moment where you saw that, purpose-driven organizations are completely unaware. And maybe they even have such a low score, like it's just unimaginable that there's just much good that they could actually do. So kind of just walk us through one of those moments and, kind of how that person approached it, what was their wow moment, and how you started bringing them on that journey.
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's since we really became independent, so it was last September time, and we wanted to finesse sort of our services that we were doing, and we wanted to really focus in and become known for certain services, of which accessible design was one, and obviously design for good as a whole, but that sustainable web. And I think it's like my creative lead is super passionate, always has been, about, not just the sort of user friendliness of a website, but also the fact that it's, light and eco-friendly. And so we've really lent into that. But I don't think it was one particular client. I think it was just an amalgamation of the fact that every conversation any of us had with either individuals or organizations, and be that because we were talking to them about doing work with them or just in a sort of networking scenario. And there was just this real lack of knowledge, but also not sort of, lack of knowledge, but also a real thirst to know more, but why? Why is that? Why is that the case? And I think when you are a purpose-led organization, and you sort of, maybe don't realize that, especially like I said earlier, if you work in the environmental space, then there was a real sort of thirst for, okay, so how can I address this? And so I think it was a real gradual thing. And the reason that I kind of ended up in doing the report is that we used to do them when we were in-house for our previous organisation on a variety of topics around leadership. And when we became independent, we always really wanted to do a report. Like I love data, and I love looking at sort of human, understanding and emotion, and why is X meaning Y. So it was always something that we wanted to do as an agency, and especially to the point I mentioned earlier about sort of wanting to add more to the sector as thought leaders. And so so it just became really apparent that there was a real need to have a look at these, and also what different types of organisation and what their different types of reasons were for not understanding or not knowing. Because, a B Corp, for example, has got very different reasons and very different sort of often financial positioning to do things about it, as opposed to a charity or a tiny charity. So we really just wanted to kind of understand what people's barriers were to it, and then help address them if we can. So yes, but it is, and I don't know if in the corporate world if that gap would be the same. We've only focused on mission-driven organisations within the UK, so it'd be interesting to potentially look at sort of the bigger corporates as well.
Yeah, I know, and then start comparing it, based on different companies, types, and then also like countries and like the awareness level. I could imagine in Germany it's probably much lower than the UK. Sorry, Germans. But I think that's the reality. So you touched on something I would love to dig into a little bit more, because I find it interesting, because you were talking about the difference between like B Corps and charities and kind of their awareness. Can you dive a little bit more on like, what does that mean? What were they thinking versus the other group? Yeah,
so in the report we looked at 4 different areas. We looked at 4 different types of organisation: B Corps, sustainability consultancies, environmental charities, and charities. And the sort of the reasons for the lack of awareness were quite different. So the B Corps, for example, the majority of them hosted on renewable energy, obviously good, but that was it. So in the rest of their web, and I think one of the things that you were touching on in our sort of pre-questions was, why isn't that enough? And I think particularly with B Corps, I think, it is a very rigorous certification to get, as we know, because we got ours last week. Woohoo! But I think, but part of that rigor isn't anything to do with your digital sustainability and your website yet at the moment. So I think for a B Corp, it's almost like, right, renewable energy, tick, we're done. We don't need to do anything else. And then I think whereas some of the charities we spoke to were very aware, or more aware, maybe not very, but they didn't have the resources to be able to do anything about it. And I think what I really hope with this report partly is that if nothing else, it just puts the digital sustainability strategy further up on people's to-do lists. I think it's one of the ones that often, and in fact, we've got a quote in there from an environmental charity who says it just gets pushed down and down the list. She's aware and she does her best to do what she can herself on her website, but she's super busy and it literally just gets pushed down and down. And I think to a whole, I think everyone we spoke to and in the survey, it was just not top of the list. And what's really interesting about that, sorry, I'm sort of segueing slightly, but
no way.
What's really interesting about that is the business case behind having a sustainable website is really becoming more and more important. So especially for potentially the likes of well, really anyone, but potentially the likes of B Corps or sustainability consultancies. There's 2 reasons. One is that legislation is getting stricter. So there's the European Accessibility Act, which came in June, which means that, websites have to reach a certain standard of accessibility in terms of how they are designed and built, which is great. But then there's also the fact that if you have a eco-friendly website, it means they're obviously lighter, they're more user-friendly, and therefore they will come up higher in search ratings. And so therefore... You cannot afford to not have a sustainable website, and that will only be the case more and more going forward, because your SEO, you won't appear in searches as much as other organisations that have prioritised this. So yeah, it's really interesting talking to people about that as well, because then they were like, oh, maybe we should. And like you touched on earlier, that doesn't mean you have to do everything all at once and be perfect. You just plan for the next 3 years to take baby steps to get it to where you need to be. and unless you want to do it all in one go. But yeah, so I think there's just sort of different priorities for different types of organisation. But to a whole, it was always, we'll do that tomorrow, we'll do that later. And actually, business-wise, it's going to become more and more important to address it.
I'm really glad you brought this up because I think about this quite a bit, especially within our like sustainable marketing space and, how to bring more everyday marketers and creatives, bring them more awareness on, why this should matter to them. So I really liked this part actually in the report on how you pulled at, the strings of, optimizing your website. There's more opportunity of getting into search and then it's more user friendly and all of that. Have you been having any conversations with marketers, let's say outside of our bubble, where you've kind of felt that type of line of thought and the research that you've done kind of resonating a bit more?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's in fact, it was a Clean Creatives event a while ago that we were talking about, how can we bring this into the sort of world of design more generally. And I think there's a big piece around educating the youth of, designers who are, coming into, we should be putting this into sort of universities and courses and, how to go code in a green way. And I think there's a real appetite for it. But I think, well, it's a bit hard because the world that we exist in, especially with Clean Creatives, you're meeting marketeers for the most part who want to be in this to do, good things for people and planet. So you're kind of, talking to the converted most of the time. But I think, and what I do love, and I've said this before, but is, sometimes, and so definitely when I was sort of, before I got into sort of the impact space, agencies were fiercely competitive against each other. You did not engage with another agency only if you had to, because, you're working with multiple agencies for one client. But what I love about this is, I met a creative lead the other day of a big agency, and he didn't know about this sustainable design. And he was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if we can create a kind of group of designers that can kind of educate each other and, workshop things out. And, that knowledge sharing, you didn't see it 10, 15 years ago, I don't think, within agency land, I mean. And so to be able to kind of do that and see that, I think it's really powerful. And again, it's this, we're in this together, there's only one crisis. Well, there's one main crisis that affects the entire planet at the moment. And, let's pull together to try and address that. And I think that's I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you brought this up because I often try to bring up, I think, we know that like over 80% of people in general are concerned about climate change and they want to see action from companies and they want to see action from governments. Yeah. But they don't always see the actions that they can take actually within their day-to-day work. You're spending 1/3 of your life in your work and, going to work every day and being engaged in those projects. And those projects have impact. So I think that's really interesting how you've seen in your career also this transition. I think that also speaks to, marketers and creatives being more socially and environmentally aware and care about climate change. Yeah. And so it's like almost we just need to connect them to Susie and her report because this is just like one thing that, they can really work on. And I want to plug in, I have so many experiences actually as an agency too, working with marketers outside of our bubble. They go through these website design sprints, they're pulling it together. So many in the last 5 years. And I always bring up sustainable web and building a sustainable website and why that's important. And it's always a little bit more expensive. So I think that's maybe something that, we need to have that kind of value conversation. Yeah. But I have a hard time pulling them in that direction. And I'm not sure what it is. I think it comes down to trust, reputation. They want to go with somebody they know. Of course, the cost is there. Yeah. But I hope this narrative starts changing because I really think, marketers, we spend so much time on the website. This is like one of our most important assets in our entire marketing suite. And if we can't get this one thing right, if we did get this one thing right, I mean, it would completely transform our entire marketing strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important, like websites for most organizations, like you say, but, especially for, charities and, for fundraising and it comes from us. I think accessibility comes hand in hand with sustainability. And, if you haven't got a website that's optimized in the correct way, either for the planet or B, for people who, for example, may be colorblind or who, are using screen readers, all of this lends itself to a better user experience. And if you have a website that's optimized in that way, well, rather if you don't, you're missing out on a whole market. And we've just we paired up recently with an Oxfordshire charity called My Vision, and they are developing or have developed a tool to be able to support agencies in making their accessibility not just kind of where it should be standard wise, but another level of using human people to kind of test the websites that we build with screen readers who are blind to really, really get into how you make a website accessible. And that just, again, from a business case scenario, that just opens up your audience hugely, because the amount of people that get on a website and either it's slow to load, especially if you're, not in somewhere like the UK or where there's really good internet systems for the most part, then they're dropping off, they get bored, they leave, they can't access the bit they want to. So it's really, again, it comes back to the business case from an accessibility point of view as well as a sustainable one.
Mm-hmm. That's when it starts blurring and merging together, which is really powerful.
Yeah.
Because I think that at that point people realize there's all these benefits for business, but actually if we do it in alignment with sustainability, intentions, we're really helping all things, people, planet, and then also profit, and then it's in balance, and that's what we're trying.
Exactly. And I think that is I mean, we've heard a lot about sort of balancing purpose with profit here at Blue Earth, haven't we, this week, these last few days, but it is, it's really important and doable. It doesn't need to cost the earth. And actually, I don't think it's any more expensive to do a sort of sustainable website than a normal one. And obviously, if you're not thinking of doing your website anyway, then that is an additional cost. But otherwise, there's tweaks you can make as well.
Yeah, this was me trying to figure out why those clients didn't go with a sustainable, because I would recommend sustainable website agencies like yours to them, and they would go, no, we want to go with somebody. And I think it really came down probably to who they know. Yeah. And that's actually a question, maybe you have some insight, is why isn't more website agencies doing this? Because if this is important for users, important for visibility, important for regulation, why isn't every website agency thinking like this?
I know, it's a really good question. I don't know the answer because I find it bizarre. I mean, it's kind of good for us. But I think also there's an agency called Wholegrain who have been doing this for sort of 15, 17 years, I think, who literally wrote the book on it. And, so this isn't a new thing. It's not that it's just come to light in the last couple of years. And we are fully sort of in support of each other and what we're both doing, again, to go back to that kind of, supportive feeling within the agency world now that's changed so much. But yeah, I don't really know, but I do think there is an appetite now for it, or beginning to be, and learning. So it's just all about awareness, I think. Just, getting out there, talking about it, and it becoming a thing. And ideally, getting into some sort of education would be great. I'd love to be talking to universities about getting it on their sort of curriculum, or even at school. My my kids have got sort of eco council, and they they're talking about stuff they can do in schools, and there's amazing charities who go into school and sort of educate about these things from that age. And I think that's super important, and that's how we're going to change the future. Is we're talking about 6-7-year-olds. How can you be? In fact, my kids' school wanted me to come in and talk about what is a sustainable website. So my kids' primary school. I mean, that's amazing.
Oh, that's adorable.
I mean, it'd be terrifying, but
oh, that would be wonderful though. But I think that in general, this is a really big narrative, not just for sustainable websites and what we're talking about now, but just sustainability in general, and how to embed it more into the university system. Sustainable marketing, for example, I always get why aren't every single course at least talking about sustainability in a sense, or we just have 2 or 3 courses about sustainable marketing, sustainable communications, and what that means, and how to embed that into your sustainability practices. Oh, like the 4 P's and how to reform. I could go. I have a lot of opinions about that, but I think that's a really good point, is embedding it into education on all levels.
Yeah, and I think also using the terminology of sustainable as well, as we all know, has become a bit of a, not necessarily a buzzword, but I think people are a bit I think it has started to potentially put people off a bit as well if they're like, oh, sustainability. Whereas if you talk about eco-friendly or, a carbon light website, then that kind of, it seems to resonate a bit more, that language, and especially in terms of search terms. People don't Google sustainable websites. They'll Google eco-friendly website, for example. So I think just making sure the language that we're using is still resonating with people, because I think particularly sustainability professionals as well, I think they've got often they're, an island in an organisation and they have so much pressure on them. And I think, just finding language that meets people where they're at is really important to make it resonate, I think, as is the case with most marketing. But
I think we can all benefit and learn from that and speak similar languages to really get our projects forward. So, quote from the report.
Yeah.
So, quote, 84% of the audited websites that were done in your report were hosted on renewable energy, yet only 64% of them still received a failing performance grade, so an F.
Yeah.
You touched on this already, but explain to us again, because I actually don't know, even I'm a sustainable marketing activist, why green hosting is not enough. I literally say this to people like, the least you could do is do green hosting provider, and, that's like the basics. Yeah. But explain to us why that's not enough anymore and why there could be so much more potential there.
Yeah. And I think, was it ever enough? I don't know if it ever was enough, but it certainly was a tick box. And it certainly was a kind of, yes, do that. But like you say, it's the minimum you should be doing, because, websites have evolved to be heavier, bigger. There's more that we use them now for. So you can use point of sale on them. They've evolved over however many last decades to be just heavier, clunkier, bigger things. And with that, I think didn't come the realization that added more, took more energy, used more. So I think, just having the hosting on renewables is great. But, you've got to have the one obvious one is, your imagery, for example. So images can be very small and or very large on a website in terms of their size. They look exactly the same. But they we spoke to one charity in the course of this report who their patron is the Queen, and they had an image of her on the footer of every single page of their website, and it was absolutely destroying their sort of sustainability of their website because they hadn't compressed it. So Queen Camilla, a little queen who's about this big, and once they'd compressed all of that, it literally reduced the carbon output of their website by about 80%.
Wow!
It was when they were like, "Oh, that was so easy."
Should write her a letter. Like...
Yeah, exactly. So I just think there's the usage, the sort of size of websites has grown so much that it isn't enough to just host on renewables anymore. It is just part of the bigger picture. And, like I said earlier, that doesn't mean you have to green code your entire website, and do not ask me how you do that, because I'm not the tech on this. But making sure that that you haven't got excessive pages where you don't need them, that your user navigation is streamlined and effective. And again, that comes down to ease for your users as well. But, that you haven't got, unnecessary pages, unnecessary video as well. People like to have video on their website because it looks nice, but do you really need it there? Is it really necessary? And most often the case it's not. And I think the other one that is sort of really contributes as well is the amount of fonts that you have on there. Multiple times we've spoken to people and they've got sort of 20 different fonts on their website. So that means that every time you go onto the website, it loads all of the fonts, even if you're only on that one page using one of them. So it's just so there's things like that just mean that it isn't enough just to host renewables. It's something you should be doing. But there's just so many other things that contribute that are heavier, which is why these scores are often so bad, despite the fact people are hosting. And again, why often most of the organisations were a bit shocked. They were like, "Oh, but I host. Like, why is that not enough?" And it's like, well, because there's just a myriad of other ways that energy is used digitally. So it comes back down to the awareness as well of actually what digital energy usage is, and it's all these contributing factors.
Yep. I think it also speaks a little bit to the overall sustainability narrative of, what we're trying to achieve. It's not just about, putting one little thing in there and kind of getting a nice score or something. It's also the overall, we have to reduce things in general. So first we have to reduce, then we have to optimize, and then we have to, maybe do offsetting that's down the road.
Yeah.
So I think it also speaks to the process, looking at your website optimization more holistically. It's not just about saying green energy provider check. That's kind of like old school sustainability that we need to be moving away from. Now we need to think about, can we build websites within, the resources and the structures that we have today? And then, how can we optimize them, make them better for profit, people, and planet? And then, maybe at the end of the day, when you get it down, well, then we can think about, the other side of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were talking about green coding. Let's put green coding aside. We're not developers. Let's just imagine like we're an everyday marketer sitting inside a department, they care about sustainability. They're trying to make action. We've now convinced them that the website is like the most important thing for them. What is like one or two thing that marketer can start doing like today, tomorrow, to start, working towards a more low carbon website?
Yeah. The first one, I think, is as I mentioned earlier, is the image compression. Like, really make sure that all your images are compressed. It won't mean they appear any differently on the page, and that is, it's the first thing to look at. The second is to make sure that your website is sort of optimized from a plugin point of view. That you are regularly updating your plugins to make sure that, because those can help you to make your website run optimally, but only if they're updated and they're sort of current. And that also then lends itself to sort of being more sort of ethical in terms of making sure your data is protected, that all the security side of things is up to date as well, which all contributes. And then, like I mentioned earlier about the fonts, just making sure that you haven't got unused fonts on there. And there's loads of, so there's some really good tools out there, which I mentioned in the report, that anyone can run. You just put your URL into them. Digital Beacon is the one that we use mainly. And then there's a website carbon calculator as well. And if you put your website in there, it will tell you how much carbon is being used per page when someone lands on your homepage for the first visit, and then also for repeat visits after that. But it will then, or the Digital Beacon one in particular, then goes into detail of where on your website you're most carbon inefficient. So whether that's the imagery, whether that's the multimedia, whether that's the fonts or not. So you can itemize where you could make improvements quickly and easily for the most effect. And obviously, if you're not hosted on renewable energy, then host on renewable energy. So yes, I would highly recommend, if anyone's interested, you don't need an agency to do that for you. You can do it yourself, just to get a picture of how you can start to improve things.
Yeah, those are very actionable steps. I love it.
Yeah.
But if you're redesigning your website, go to a sustainable marketing agency. We already talked about that.
Yes,
It's definitely, if it's in the pipeline.
Well, and I think also there's the step before that, which is just as important, as if you're thinking about your brand, not just your website, but your brand as a whole, and you're thinking about, well, in fact, if you're thinking about doing either, but, ensuring that your brand identity is accessible, so that, your colours can resonate with people, that your language is inclusive and, it appeals to as wide an audience as possible, especially if you've got multiple audiences, like, donators, investors, Joe Public, whoever. So I think there is a step before that, just to ensure that your brand as a whole is working for you as hard as it can be, and really aligning with your values. If you have values of being collaborative and ethical, and make sure that your brand is really singing to that. Because if you're doing good things for the people and for planet, your brand is your most important asset, and so you've got to be optimizing that, so to its best ability, really.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end our talk, because that resonated so much. Well, thank you, Susie, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Just tell us a little bit really quickly, what's next for the report? Where do you want to take it from here?
Well, I think just talking about it a lot. So you can download it off our website, which is www.designbyoxygen.com. It's open source, so anyone can download it. I think read it, share it, please. I really want people to kind of be interested by it, and just to kind of spread the word about it as much as possible. And then I think just to continue creating talking points out of it, and to really hammer home the message that you can take little steps. No one's perfect. And I think if that's the one thing that someone takes out of today, is that, it's a journey, and just to make sure that, you're just aware of it in the first instance, and then just start planning it in so that, maybe in 3 years' time you can be where you want to be. You don't have to be there tomorrow. But yeah, so that's my hope.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.